All right, so ever feel like playing detective?
In the world of chemicals.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what today's deep dive into toxicology is all about.
Yeah.
And our guide is RoleCatcher, this awesome career resource.
It's fascinating to see how people react to the word toxicology.
Right.
You usually think of poisons and crime dramas,
Right.
but it's so much bigger than that.
Right. We're talking everyday stuff from what we put on our skin to the air we breathe.
Right.
This RoleCatcher guide is like, hey, I want to see how it all works.
Yeah, and it goes deep on the career itself.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher breaks down the skills you need at every level, from your first job to running the lab.
One thing that really jumped out at me,
Okay.
they highlighted this toxicologist who helped a whole community understand the dangers of a local factory's waste.
Mm,
They presented the findings in a way that even non-scientists could grasp.
right.
And it actually led to policy changes.
Wow.
It seems like being able to communicate complex scientific findings
Oh, yeah.
is super important in this field.
Absolutely. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't explain it clearly, it won't have the impact it should.
Right.
And this field has so many branches.
Yeah.
From ensuring safe workplaces to solving crimes.
Wow.
It's way more than just lab work.
Speaking of which, RoleCatcher dives into the different paths you can take as a toxicologist.
Right.
What stood out to you?
The section on emerging pollutants was particularly fascinating,
Okay.
especially the bit about microplastics.
Right.
They're everywhere,
Yeah, they're literally everywhere.
and we're just starting to understand their long-term impact.
Right.
We've also been seeing more pharmaceuticals and personal care products showing up as pollutants.
Oh, wow.
I mean, think about how much of that stuff gets washed down the drain every day.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
Everyday products potentially having these long-term consequences we haven't even fully grasped yet.
Right.
It makes you realize how crucial toxicologists are in identifying and addressing these emerging issues before they become major problems.
Exactly. And this is where toxicology gets really interesting.
Okay.
Imagine having to study something that wasn't even considered a threat a few years ago.
Yeah.
Talk about a challenge.
Right.
It's like detective work, but on a whole other level.
So you need a good understanding of traditional toxicology principles,
Right.
but you also need to be adaptable and ready to tackle these new challenges as they emerge.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher had some interesting points about the use of big data and computational toxicology.
Okay.
With the rise of these massive data sets,
Yeah.
toxicologists can now analyze information on a scale we never could before.
It's like having a giant puzzle,
Right.
but instead of cardboard pieces, it's data points, and you're trying to see the bigger picture of how these substances are affecting us.
It's incredible, really. This technology allows for faster analysis
Wow.
and can even help predict the toxicity of substances before they even hit the market.
Oh, wow.
This ability to model potential risks using computers is changing the game.
I bet it sounds like toxicology is a field that requires a unique blend of scientific expertise and adaptability.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the importance of communication skills, which RoleCatcher emphasizes throughout.
Right.
Being able to explain complex scientific concepts to non-scientists is key in this field.
Makes sense, especially when you're dealing with public health crises or advocating for policy changes.
Right.
You need to be able to connect with people who might not have a scientific background,
Right.
but are directly affected by these issues.
Exactly. Think about the toxicologist and RoleCatcher who uncovered that lead contamination issue.
Right.
They had to communicate the urgency of the situation to the community and advocate for change.
Yeah.
Those communication skills were just as important as their scientific knowledge in that case.
Okay, so we've got a career path that requires a strong foundation in science.
Yeah.
The ability to embrace cutting-edge technology and the communication skills to explain it all in a way that resonates with a variety of audiences.
Right.
That's quite a combination.
It is, and it highlights why toxicology is such a fascinating and in-demand field.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking this might be the path for you,
Yeah.
RoleCatcher goes deep on the education and specializations you can consider.
It's not just one path, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
You can specialize in environmental toxicology,
Okay.
focusing on pollution control. You can work in occupational toxicology, ensuring workplace safety in industries handling hazardous materials.
So you're saying you could be protecting workers in a factory one day
Right.
and then researching the impact of a new pesticide the next.
Exactly. And that's just scratching the surface. There's also forensic toxicology, clinical toxicology, reproductive toxicology.
Wow.
The list goes on.
Okay, so we've established that toxicology is about way more than just identifying poisons.
Right.
It's a diverse field with a wide range of applications and specializations.
Ah.
But what about the day-to-day work? What's it really like to be a toxicologist?
Well, it's a blend of lab work, data analysis, and as we've discussed, a surprising amount of communication.
I was thinking about that example from RoleCatcher,
Okay.
the one about the toxicologists who presented their findings to a government agency.
Right.
That kind of public speaking, being able to break down complex scientific information for policymakers, it takes a specific skill set,
Absolutely. And don't forget about writing.
right?
Toxicologists are constantly writing reports, research papers, and grant proposals. They even need to be able to explain things clearly in emails and presentations to colleagues who might not be experts in their specific area of toxicology.
So it's not just about being a science whiz, you
Mhm.
have to be a clear communicator too.
Yes, you do.
And with all this talk about the importance of communication, I'm curious about how toxicologists handle the ethical aspects of their work,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to things like animal testing. RoleCatcher touches on this, right?
It does, and it's a topic that often sparks debate.
Right,
It's important to remember that toxicologists are scientists,
right.
but they're also citizens who care about animal welfare.
Right, it's not just about the science, it's about the ethics of it all, too.
Exactly. And RoleCatcher highlights how there's a big push in the field to reduce reliance on animal testing and explore alternative methods.
Okay.
They discuss promising advancements in cell cultures and computer modeling as potential alternatives.
So technology isn't just changing how toxicologists analyze data.
Right.
It's also changing how they conduct research itself, making it potentially more humane in the process.
Precisely. And that's what makes this field so dynamic and interesting. It's constantly evolving, both scientifically and ethically.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from the diverse career paths within toxicology to the ethical considerations and the role of technology in shaping the field.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Right.
let's take a closer look at those different specializations that RoleCatcher highlights.
Okay.
Because it seems like each one requires a unique set of skills and knowledge.
Right.
What do you say we start with environmental toxicology?
Sounds good. Environmental toxicology. Yeah, that's a great place to start,
Right.
especially with all the concerns about pollution and climate change.
Right.
RoleCatcher really highlights the growing importance of this field.
It makes sense. We're becoming more aware of how our actions impact the environment.
Right.
And that's where these specialists come in. What kind of stuff would an environmental toxicologist actually do?
Think of them as guardians of our ecosystems.
Okay.
They're investigating the effects of pollutants on air, water, soil.
Right.
Basically, anywhere those substances end up.
Yeah.
They might be studying how industrial waste affects a local river or the long-term impact of pesticides on a forest ecosystem.
So it's not just about identifying what the pollutants are,
Right.
but also understanding their ripple effects on the environment. Did RoleCatcher give any specific examples of that kind of work?
It did. There was a fascinating case study about a team of toxicologists who used bird feathers to track the spread of mercury pollution.
What?
Turns out these feathers act like little historical records,
Oh.
revealing pollution levels over time.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed them to map out the spread of mercury from a specific industrial source.
That's using nature to understand the impact of human activity in a whole new way.
Right.
That's really cool. But it's not just about research and investigation, right?
Right.
I imagine environmental toxicologists are also involved in developing solutions to these problems.
Absolutely. They
Yeah.
play a crucial role in developing and implementing environmental regulations.
Okay.
For instance, those safety limits on chemicals in our drinking water.
Yeah. Right.
Environmental toxicologists are the ones who provide the scientific data that those limits are based on.
It's like they're the bridge between science and policy,
Yeah.
making sure the regulations are actually based on sound research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their expertise is becoming increasingly important as we face new challenges,
Right.
like figuring out how to manage all those emerging pollutants we talked about earlier.
Right, like those microplastics turning up everywhere. It's unsettling, but good to know there are experts tackling that issue head on.
And it's not just about what's happening here on land. RoleCatcher had a whole section on aquatic toxicology,
Okay.
focusing on pollutants in our oceans and freshwater systems.
Which makes sense considering how much of our planet is covered by water. What kind of things would an aquatic toxicologist focus on?
They might study the impact of oil spills on marine life, the effects of agricultural runoff on freshwater ecosystems,
Right.
or even the long-term consequences of pharmaceuticals ending up in our waterways.
It's a whole other world down there with its own delicate balance.
Precisely. And just like on land, those aquatic ecosystems are facing increasing pressure from pollution and climate change.
Yeah.
Aquatic toxicologists are at the forefront of understanding and mitigating those threats.
Okay, so we've got environmental toxicologists working to protect our air, water, soil,
Right.
and all the creatures that call those ecosystems home. But what about the workplace? RoleCatcher mentioned something called occupational toxicology, right?
Right. It's all about protecting workers from potential hazards in the workplace.
Which makes total sense, especially when you think about industries that deal with chemicals manufacturing
Right.
or even just everyday office environments.
Absolutely. Occupational toxicologists are the ones who make sure those workplaces are safe for the people who spend their days there.
So what kind of stuff would they actually do?
They might be involved in assessing the risks associated with handling certain chemicals, designing ventilation systems to minimize exposure to fumes,
Okay.
or developing safety protocols for handling hazardous materials.
So they're like the architects of a safe workplace.
In a way, they are. They're the ones who identify potential hazards, assess the risks, and then work to minimize or eliminate those risks to protect workers' health.
It's a huge responsibility. Are there any specific industries where occupational toxicology is particularly important?
Definitely RoleCatcher had a whole list of them.
Okay.
Manufacturing, construction, agriculture, healthcare, basically anywhere workers might encounter potentially hazardous substances. Even offices can pose risks if they're not properly ventilated, or if employees are exposed to things like dust or mold.
It's amazing what you don't think about on a daily basis, like the air quality in my office. Never really thought about it until now.
Right.
But getting back to those industries, RoleCatcher mentioned something about how occupational toxicologists were instrumental in reducing lead poisoning cases among workers.
Oh, absolutely. That was a major victory for occupational safety.
Yeah.
Lead used to be a major problem in industries like construction and manufacturing. Toxicologists played a key role in identifying the risks of lead exposure and advocating for safer work practices and regulations to protect workers.
That's incredible. It's one thing to study toxicology, but then to see it actually making a tangible difference in people's lives is pretty amazing.
Absolutely, and it highlights how diverse the field is and the impact these specialists can have in such a wide range of settings.
We've covered a lot of ground already, from protecting our ecosystems to ensuring safer workplaces. It seems like toxicologists are involved in so many aspects of our lives, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly, and we've only just scratched the surface of the specializations within this fascinating field.
Okay, so before we dive into the next area of toxicology, let's switch gears for a moment
Go
and
ahead.
talk about the actual skills you need to be successful in this field. RoleCatcher had some interesting insights on that.
It did. It's not just about being a science whiz, although a strong foundation in biology, chemistry, and toxicology principles is definitely a must.
Right.
You also need those all-important soft skills we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Communication, problem-solving, critical thinking.
Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with real-world problems that affect people, animals, and the environment.
Exactly. You need to be able to analyze data, identify trends, and communicate your findings in a clear and concise way.
Right.
And let's not forget about the importance of staying up to date with the latest research and technologies, which are constantly evolving in this field.
Especially with all the advancements in big data analysis and computational toxicology, it's like the field itself is constantly evolving, becoming more sophisticated and nuanced.
It really is, and that's what makes it so exciting. There's always something new to learn, new challenges to tackle, and new discoveries to be made. And RoleCatcher doesn't shy away from the importance of technical skills.
Like what specifically?
It highlights how proficiency in specific software programs is becoming increasingly important,
Okay.
especially those used for data analysis and modeling, things like GraphPad, Prism, and SAS, which we touched on earlier.
Makes sense. In a data-driven field like toxicology, knowing your way around those tools is essential.
Exactly. It's not just about crunching numbers, though.
Right.
Toxicologists need to be able to interpret those numbers, draw meaningful conclusions, and communicate those conclusions to a variety of audiences.
So it's that blend of scientific expertise, technical skills, and communication prowess that makes a truly effective toxicologist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a challenging but incredibly rewarding path for those who are passionate about science and making a real difference in the world.
Well said. Now I'm ready to dive back into those specializations. What's next on our list from RoleCatcher?
All right, back to our toxicology deep dive with RoleCatcher as our trusty guide.
Right.
We've seen how these specialists protect our environment and workplaces,
Right.
but RoleCatcher dives into some really specific areas too. What else caught your eye?
Well, we've mentioned forensic toxicology a few times.
Right.
And let me tell you, The RoleCatcher insights into this field are fascinating.
Okay.
It's not just about analyzing blood and tissue samples like you see on TV, although that's definitely part of it.
Right. It's like they're solving puzzles, but the stakes are way higher because it's about real-life crimes and justice.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They're using their knowledge of toxins to help solve crimes, often working closely with law enforcement.
Yeah.
RoleCatcher highlighted a case where a forensic toxicologist was able to determine the exact type of poison used in a murder case based on trace amounts found in the victim's hair follicles.
Wow.
Talk about attention to detail. Wow, that's incredible. It's like they're piecing together clues that no one else would even think to look for. It's amazing how toxicology plays such a critical role in the justice system.
It really does, and it's not always about murder mysteries.
Right.
Forensic toxicologists might also be involved in cases of drug overdoses, DUI investigations, or even determining if someone was incapacitated at the time of a crime.
So their work can help determine guilt or innocence, which is a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
But RoleCatcher also delves into clinical toxicology, which seems like a whole other side of the field. What's that all about?
If you picture a hospital setting dealing with poisonings or overdoses,
Okay.
that's where you'd find a clinical toxicologist.
Okay.
They're the experts on the effects of toxins on the human body,
Right.
working to diagnose and treat people who've been exposed to something harmful.
So they're like the frontline responders in those emergency situations, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They might be identifying an unknown substance someone ingested, figuring out the best course of treatment to counteract the effects of a poison, or even advising on long-term care for patients who've experienced toxic exposure.
It sounds intense, but also incredibly rewarding knowing you're helping people through what could be a life or death situation.
Absolutely. And RoleCatcher highlights a really interesting trend in clinical toxicology.
Okay.
The growing concern about exposures to things like fentanyl and other synthetic opioids.
Right. Those synthetic opioids have become a major public health crisis in recent years. It's scary how quickly they can turn deadly.
Exactly. And clinical toxicologists are on the front lines of this crisis,
Right.
not just treating overdoses, but also working to develop new treatments and educate the public about the dangers of these substances.
It's a reminder that toxicology isn't just about obscure chemicals or environmental hazards. It's about addressing real-world problems that affect people's lives every day.
Precisely. And it highlights how the field is constantly adapting to new challenges and emerging threats.
Speaking of adapting, RoleCatcher touched on an area I hadn't even considered: reproductive toxicology. What exactly is that about?
It focuses on the effects of toxins on the reproductive system.
Okay.
This could involve studying how environmental pollutants might impact fertility,
Right.
or how certain medications could affect a developing fetus.
Wow, so it's about protecting both current and future generations from the harmful effects of toxins.
Exactly. And it's a field that's becoming increasingly important as we learn more about the subtle ways that environmental exposures can impact reproductive health.
RoleCatcher mentioned some pretty cutting-edge research in this area, right?
They did. They talked about how scientists are now using things like stem cells and 3D printed organs to study the effects of toxins on human development in a way that's more accurate and ethical than traditional animal testing methods.
That's fascinating. It seems like reproductive toxicology is at the forefront of both scientific and ethical advancements in the field.
Absolutely. And it highlights how diverse and dynamic the world of toxicology truly is.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
from environmental protection to criminal justice drug development to reproductive health. It seems like there's a toxicology niche for just about every interest and skill set.
There really is. And if you're someone who loves science, thrives on problem solving,
Yeah.
and is driven to make a difference in the world, then this might just be the perfect field for you.
I couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up our toxicology journey with RoleCatcher, any final words of wisdom for our listener who might be considering this path?
Don't be afraid to explore.
Yeah.
Toxicology is a vast and ever-evolving field, so there's something for everyone.
Right.
Whether you're passionate about protecting the environment, advancing human health, or ensuring workplace safety, there's a place for you in the world of toxicology.
That's a great note to end on. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, be sure to check out RoleCatcher for a more in-depth look at the world of toxicology. They've got tons of resources on everything from career paths to the latest research. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.